Hello, friends, and welcome back to my back porch in my Bordeaux shows episode. Again, looking at the beautiful mountains behind me. And today I would like to talk to you about very, very complicated topic of race, ethnicity, and efficacy and use of inspiration from real world history of real world groups of people in stories, be it fantasy or real stories or based on real stories. Uh, of course, my channel is based around telling mythology, folklore, and history, then using that inspiration to maybe in the future tell more fantastical stories, especially around the tabletop RPGs and world building. And one of the topics that, of course, I usually come about, of course, is taking inspiration from history for fantasy races. One of my more popular videos is, of course, about me talking about Caucasian mountain peoples and how they should be used more for inspiration for dwarves, my favorite race, of course. Can tell by my huge beard, I basically am a dwarf, except a really tall one. And talking about this topic, we of course get into the subject of using actual world people for inspiration for fantasy. Fantasy being more stereotypical, having monstrous races, different creatures, and how these two complicated topics gel. And we're going to touch on this in the future where I go into more fantasy anthropology. But now I want to talk about real world history and the topic of race and ethnicity and how it is perceived, created, destroyed, and manipulated throughout history. And of course, I'll be talking about this through my personal perspective as a real Caucasian from beautiful mountains of Caucasus. Of course, this is a sensitive topic, and I'm going to use the sensitivity of a sledgehammer going through it without care and worry, because I personally do not subscribe to racial hierarchy and racialized view of the world, because, well, I know it's true history and true colors and how foolish it is, and I also live in a world where there are many different ethnicities, many different cultures, many different languages, and the subject of race becomes so unimportant when you go down deep into actual people's lived experiences and actual world that we live in. First, let's talk about race and what the hell it is. I've actually covered similar topic about origins of humanity, biblical and other mythological accounts of the world flood, and how after the world flood a new world is created and populated with new people. One of those subjects is, of course, the story of Noah and the flood. I've made multiple videos about Noah's flood and other flood mythology, so check them out before watching this video. Watch my other videos, especially those that don't get a lot of views. They are as good as any other. So, okay, I guess. I don't know. So, you will not be surprised to learn that a lot of modern racial categorization originates from Bible and the story of Noah, how his three children, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, became fathers of different nation groups, not even one nation, there are a bunch of groups of different nations, and that became the basis of racial categorization and, unfortunately, as well, of racial hierarchy. I've gone deeper, of course, in my other videos, but I'll say that Ham becomes the first sinner of this new world, shaming his father, and due to that shame, his brothers curse him out, and his father puts a curse on him to always be a slave and a servant to his brothers, which is an unfortunate view of the world. And this idea of sons of Ham, whoever they may be, the idea who they are and what they represent always changes, especially when you go into Western Europe's spree into colonization and seafaring age. an age of discovery. Then new ideas get introduced because you find new people, and these people aren't in the Bible. Who are you? You do not exist according to my holy book. So we must create new ideas to somehow push in, and it's one of the funniest results would be the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, saying that Indians are the last tribe of Israelites that didn't accept Jesus Christ, so they were cursed to become brown and black-skinned, which is hilarious. And of course, continuing talking about Western age of colonization, new ideas, new paradigms, new races, new peoples, new ethnicities come into being, and now we need to create new hierarchy where the lesser and underneath the greater, and how one group of people is superior to another group of people, but there are so many people in between. How do we categorize them? How do we put them in a box? And those bastards don't neatly fit into those boxes we made up, so they must be at fault, not us, creating stupid boxes that don't fit people properly. And in this round and round we go for century in this idea of what is race, who is what people, what group of people, how do we put all of these groups of people in these boxes, and creates a situation where each nation, each new country gives its own little box to put different people inside, which of course doesn't fit everyone neatly, and it's of course their fault for not fitting into our perfectly made boxes neatly, and not the box's fault for not being actually indicative of reality. It's easy to say that idea of race is made up, but we as people are basically ruled by things that are made up. We create our own boogeyman and live under its shadow, be it in a good way or a bad way, because that is one of our gifts and curses, that we can give shape and purpose and meaning to this world. Sometimes that meaning doesn't gel with other people's meaning, and we need to find and evolve it, but some people do not want to change and learn through this paradigm. But it became, of course, it's a very complicated topic. What is true, what is not, blah, 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 blah. Trying to dig myself out of a hole that I dug myself in. But I think I can shed some light into this conversation because, of course, I am Caucasian, real Caucasian, not Caucasian. I am not Caucasian. I am real European mountain man from the mountains of Caucasus. And let's talk about the Caucasian in the room, Caucasian, of course. Where did this idea came into the conversation of race, and why did it stuck around? Of course, mentioning Noah's flood and how you should watch my video on Noah's flood and other flood myths, you get the sense that many people throughout history, especially around Eurasia, considered Caucasus, mountains of Caucasus, somehow important and origin place for their mythological age. Be it Indians and Persians thinking that their ancestors, Aryans, came from northern mountain lands. Same being in Middle Eastern accounts of the world flood, how only in the mountains of Ararat, that's been over those mountains over there, how humanity's last vessel, the ark with his, be it Utnapishtim or Noah, stopped in the mountains of Ararat and repopulated the world. So a lot of narratives go back to Caucasus being either the origin place or repopulating space after, of course, the flood. And that idea, of course, brought itself into Europe and into 16th, 17th, 18th century of scholars who consider themselves raciologists and anthropologists and people who wanted to categorize everyone into neat box. One of them being Sir Blumenbach. He's a full title of that guy. I don't remember for his full name. But Mr. Blumenbach had a massive collection of skulls, of human skulls, and through skulls, not even skin color and facial features, not something so surface level, skulls, human skulls. And Mr. Blumenbach used his collection of human skulls to categorize people into European Caucasians because his favorite skull, the most perfect and most beautiful skull, belonged to a Caucasian Georgian slave girl who was unfortunately sold into Islamic slave trade, ending up in the collection of this weird German man. That got in his collection due to unfortunate events involving Middle Eastern Islamic slave trade that especially targeted Caucasians, Balkans, and people in the Mediterranean and especially in the Black Sea region. During Ottoman rule and before then, unfortunately, this practice unfortunately continued for a long time, and I'm going to get back into it soon. So Blumenbach picked a Georgian girl skull as to be the most perfect and most elegant, deserving of the title of the purest of the pure. Thank you very much. I do think I have a really beautiful skull. God gave us male pattern boldness for a reason, to show off our beautiful skulls. And so he decided to categorize us Georgians as the North Star of the white race, then created other categorizations, of course. But if you actually look at human beings, human evolution, we know that we are all connected if you go farther enough. And that categorization of Caucasians being this quote-unquote scientific name for white people stuck around. After it, most people, unfortunately other than Americans, got the news that Caucasian doesn't mean white people. It's a specific group of people. It's not even one race. Caucasians aren't even one race or ethnicity. It is made up of 50 plus different ethnic groups. Some of them are related. Some of them are so old that they are related in the past before most people even existed. So, for example, us Kartvelians, Georgian, ethnic Georgians, Kartvelians, are related to, for example, I don't know, Chechens, but we are so related in such past, so long a while ago, that it probably even predates creation of Proto-Indo-Europeans. So yes, we are related, but we are related as much as we are related to you or something else. And there are many other people migrating, going out, going in. So actual ethnic population of Caucasus is far more diverse than even America is today. Maybe not quote-unquote racially and skin tone-wise diverse. It is at some levels, but there are many different ethnicities, groups of people in our history, currently, and if you take it throughout history, it's one of the most complicated ethnically populated groups of people. So it's disheartening seeing not even a racial categorization to us, Caucasian. It's more of a cultural and environmental categorizations that we call ourselves Caucasians, because so many different endemic ethnic groups that came here thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, ethnic groups that left this place thousands and thousands of years ago. So what do you even consider Caucasian is really difficult concept to wrap your hand around, and using it for white people who aren't even connected to this place is really disheartening, especially when people are out there cursing white people out and we get the stray shot. I mean, what the hell did I do? What did we do? Why you say fuck me for? What did I do? Why are you coming after us? So there are many problems. I feel like using Caucasian as a term, one of the most important to me is catching white people strays. Yeah. Fuck them, leave me alone. I know I'm joking, of course, a little bit. I feel like I'm explaining why I'm so frustrated people using Caucasian as a term to describe, one, people who are not even around here, and two, would not even use the Caucasian as a term to describe people from around here, which is bizarre. So what I'm trying to get here, Caucasian here, at least in this region, in Caucasus, is not a racial term. It's a cultural and endemic term for people who inhabit this land. Some people, like for example my people, Kartvelians, Chechens, and the Circassians. Not going to name all of them, because if I miss one of them out, I'm gonna get cursed out. If I miss all of them out, I might get away. To some races in America who consider themselves Caucasian, will not even consider someone like Armenian or Azerbaijani Caucasian either. Well, we constantly argue about this, but see, we can do it. We can call each other not real Caucasians, but you can't. And the other term, if we take actual biblical terms as origin, from Ham, Shem, Yaphet, all of them inhabiting this land thousands and thousands of years ago, even black people and Asians, all of them should be considered Caucasian. And if we take anthropological view, that Indo-Europeans, Proto-Aryans and the Yamnaya and other cultures that originated, current day Europeans, originated from Caucasus. Sure, 3 to, I don't know, 6,000 years ago, these people might have inhabited these lands, but they left these lands really, really long time ago, and I don't think they have many cultural ties to me, someone who doesn't ride horses, doesn't drink horse blood, and doesn't engage in some unsavory rituals with the horses and their women. So I'm not Indo-European, my people are not Indo-European. Fun fact, we're actually, here's a really interesting thing that I found out. Persians and Indians, who are also Indo-European, and some people do not consider them white, Aryan, while Nazis even went into Tibet and India and Iran to actually get their symbols and identity from those Aryans, but current day racists wouldn't even look at an Indian person or even Iranian person as one of their own. Well, they're more related to one another than I am to them. Like, English person is more related linguistically, at least, if we forget everything else, to Indian person than they are to me. My ethno-linguistic group, Kartvelians, are much older. Proto-Kartvelians were much older than even Proto-Indo-Europeans. Some even consider them to be somehow related. That's a complicated topic for another time. So I think I've painted the complicated, messy picture that we unfortunately have to live through. Now, going back to the topic of Islamic slave trade, how the Georgian girl's skull ended up in Blumenbach collection was that during the Middle Ages, and unfortunately after Middle Ages and even before Middle Ages, Caucasus was under constant invasion and attacks, and one of the results of invasion, colonization that you might be familiar with, is of course enslaving the local population. We bravely and greatly resisted to all conquest and enslavement, but unfortunately many people still were victims of raiding, kidnapping, one of the horrible things in our recent history, actually, quite recent, 17th century, 18th century, and before then, was that Caucasians used to raid, pillage each other, and kidnap each other's children to sell them into slavery. This is the dark topic that I'm not going to go deep into currently, because this is the origin for a lot of hatred that still goes on to this day between Caucasians. This unfortunate culture was incentivized, popularized, and in some ways directly created by Islamic slave trade, where the Islamic religion says, no, you cannot own slaves as long as they are Muslim. If they are not Muslim, do whatever the fuck you want to. Going back to the topic of Islamic slave trade, this is one of the most painful topics in Caucasus and all over Eastern Europe, especially in the Balkans and Black Sea coast. Most targeted were Balkan people and Caucasian people. in this system of Islamic world, slavery and human subjugation. We, of course, hear a lot about Western colonial slave trade, where Western powers trying to colonize the new world. There are, of course, people there, but they were considered newly discovered. So, domesticating, controlling, and subjugating these lands needed cheap or hopefully even free labor force that can do immense work and no pay. And Western powers went around subjugating societies who had maybe not developed militarily, maybe not had enough cohesion. Usually that's the problem I see, is that these societies that Western powers come in are not as cohesive, organized, and their stripes can be used to, typical story, make them fight each other, enslave each other, so you can buy or trade with weapons and use that labor force to basically domesticate the newfound land. Unfortunately, many people, especially in the West, do not know that similar and in some ways more complex, in some ways more cruel, in some ways not, system of slavery, worldwide slavery, already existed. I'm not talking about slavery of old, where army comes into a village, conquers that village, and tells them, you are our subjects, our slaves, and you must give us this and this. I mean, grabbing specific ethnic groups, specifically targeting them, and selling them in far-off lands, specifically due to their racial or ethnic, or in this case, religious categorization. In Islamic slave trade, all three were considered, because we know that different slaves from different regions, different ethnicities, had different prices. That's what I say it's more complex. I don't know, the American slave societies might have ethnic-based markets that, I don't know, so someone from the Bantu region had more of a price on their head for someone who is a Zulu or something else, but the picture I get from America, they were all bundled up into this one group of black people and subjugated and sold in this horrible and terrible understanding and framework. We, on the other hand, were attacked, raided, pillaged, children stolen into slavery, and all these horrible things also happened to us. But we had different price tags from different ethnicities, so our slave captives were at least a little bit more progressive and more. I'm saying something really stupid, I know, but the irony of life, I guess. As I've stated, Islamic slave trade had a different flavor to it. It was mostly about your religion, then about your ethnicity, and then about your physical prowess, of course, I guess. Actually, some of you might say that in Islam, slavery is actually forbidden. And would you know that one of the first Muslim converts were actually slaves? But, but, there's a big but in this holiest of holy text. That goes for Muslims. If you're a non-Muslim, if you're kafir, if I'm not mistaken, you have no rights. Well, technically, there's a hierarchy too. Islamic society is far more complex than Western societies. If they're going to be racist and religiously repressive, they're going to be more insightful about this. People who are of the book but not of the faith, as in people who believed in Old Testament and in the Bible and one God and all that. Islam, of course, is part of Abrahamic religions. People who belonged to the book were considered second-class citizens. They had to pay jizya, taxes. They could be enslaved. They could be tormented. Their accounts, their name was worth less. They had to subjugate in court, and there are many repressions. They had rights, but less. But anyone who wasn't considered of the book, so every pagan religion, quote unquote, were considered not even human, basically. And they were terribly repressed, having zero rights. None at all. In this context, both people from Africa, from sub-Saharan Africa, were targeted, and people from Caucasus and Eastern Europe, and even in England, in some places, the pirates usually raided, pillaged, and enslaved. They were more pirate trade based enslavers. White people, quote unquote, white people would just usually buy them off a local vendor. Islamic slave traders did the hard work, went out, found innocent people, slaughtered them there by their own hands, and brought them back. The lazy European would, of course, delegate it to the third or second world to do their own slavery for them. So I'm making darker jokes, but I can get away with it apparently because I also experienced hardship. My ancestors, as I personally wasn't enslaved, my ancestors, they weren't even enslaved. That's the funny thing. In Georgia, slavery was outlawed because we were a Christian European nation. But different lords, different masters, different invading warlords, be it from North Caucasus, be it from Islamic nations such as Iran, Arabia, or Ottoman Empire, all of them raided Caucasus for non-Muslim slaves. Many were sold either to be Mamluks or to be Janishari, the Janissary. Janissary army was personal army of the Sultan that existed in the Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman Empire was one of the target enslavers because they controlled the Black Sea during their height and attacked both, as I've said, Balkaners and Caucasians. Those slaves were then traded into Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia as well. Some of the slaves actually ended up working in the Indian Islamic era armies. I'm going to go deeper into the topic because one of the most interesting things about this situation, Caucasians, especially Circassians and primarily Georgians in this situation, were prized, had a higher higher price under slave tag, unfortunately. They were known as better and greater warriors. You see today so many power athletes and fighters are from Georgia and Caucasus. Caucasians are dominating MMA right now. 2 Georgian champions, 2. We'll get 3, 4, 5, and until every weight category is Georgian, we will not rest. You see sumo wrestlers, famous Toshinoshin. Here is me meeting Toshinoshin. And of course, judo is also dominating, wrestling, powerlifting. Talakhashvili, he's one of the strongest human beings right now. And many others being powerful arm wrestling. There are many. So in the Islamic slave trade, Caucasians, especially Georgians, were considered really high price. And after Mr. Blumenbach, hello again, Mr. Blumenbach, his statement that Georgians had the most beautiful skull and were considered the whitest of the whites, price for Georgians went really high up. Unfortunately, I'm joking around, but this is a really painful period of Caucasian history, especially Georgian history. We were devastated, brought to almost extinction. About 14 million Georgians were sold into slavery. 14 million. There are 3 point something Georgians right now. Barely 3 million Georgians in Georgia. 14 million. Okay, I'm not 100% sure on the statement. I saw it in a television documentary. I don't have my sources on me, but as I watched in the documentary, the statement was 14 million. Okay, dubious claim, but still the only claim I got right now. And due to that historical tragedy, a lot of Georgians became really high-ranking generals and even leaders of Mamluk and Janissary armies, subordinates and leaders in those empires. The empires that subjugated us, empires that bought our slaves, were actually then later on led by emperors originating, not emperors, like leaders originating from Georgia, Caucasus, and even Balkans and north shores of the Black Sea. That is the tragic history and the actual effects, negative effects, that racial categorization had on actual Caucasians. The fact that white people now were considered Caucasian origin, and Caucasians, especially Georgians, were considered the most beautiful and fair. Thank you very much. Slavers at the time used that statement to jack up their prices. That's what I'm trying to say. Slavery existed beforehand. It had a negative effect, but how much of a negative effect, that's another topic. Because America deciding to no longer have slaves didn't stop Islamic slave trade. That unfortunately still goes on right now. Complicated topic. I need to cover it further. I'll talk about actual great generals and leaders originated from Georgia. Just to get the idea of how many Georgians were out there on the market, at one point 2 Georgians ruled over Egypt. Ibrahim Bey and a guy who suspiciously looks just like me, Murad Bey. We know more about Ibrahim's life, or Abram Shinjikashvili, as he was known back in Georgia. Son of an Orthodox priest, he was unfortunately kidnapped as a child by Ottoman slave raiders and sold in Africa as a slave soldier until he became co-ruler of Egypt with Murad Bey, another Georgian or Circassian by some theories. They were harshly targeted by slavers as well. Many Caucasians ended up as African slaves. I'll cover his life and many other Georgians in the future, but short version is that he rebelled against Ottoman rulers but was later defeated by Napoleon, who himself had many Georgian Mamluk bodyguards. But don't you worry, another Georgian, Petre Bagrationi, defeated Napoleon. Well, other self too, I guess. Stalin isn't a rare case of Georgians having a Georgian conqueror or ethnically Georgian conqueror. There are unfortunately many such cases that our conquerors were either fully, half, or at least quarter Georgians because royal family intermixing, and especially slaves being taken to the Islamic world. There are actually many books and stories where Georgians have to battle Islamic oppressors, but one of their most powerful oppressors being an ethnic Georgian who was taken over as a child. And there is a Bashia Chuki, one of the books about this topic I'm gonna use later. And there is a two movies about this topic. There is Mamluki, about how Janissaries, not Janissaries, this is specifically Mamluks, how Ottoman slavers took them into the bazaars of Constantinople, later named Istanbul, and then those children were bought by slave traders. One was by a European slave trader. That's how Georgian skull ended up in a collection of a German person, because Europeans also participated in slave trade of white people, quote unquote. That's like, you cannot escape slavery in this conversation, but there you go. And one of them was brought to Africa, to Egypt, so he became African slave of Caucasian descent. This is how the framework that West, especially America and other colonies, have built, that there is this hierarchy that white people are always on top and the black and brown people, I don't like to categorize people by their skin color. I'm sorry, it feels wrong in my tongue. Europeans of the pale skin persuasion, let's just say, used and created this hierarchy to oppress people who happen to have different skin tones but had different cultures, different ethnicities, different histories. Someone from India or India, like this whole confusion that they're so stupid they call the new continent India, and they still call them Indians. And I found this really funny. So Indians and Indians from Americas have nothing genetically in common, but because they have same skin tone, they are considered on same playing field. And they also subjugated people from Africa, and people from Africa should always be under Caucasians. But there are plenty of cases of quote-unquote Africans who are not black people. They were usually Arab slave owners that lived as royalty in the Middle East and North Africa. They enslaved Caucasians, brought them to Africa. So there were Africans, quote unquote Africans, had quote unquote Caucasians, white people, as slaves. And there were some races, like some reverse races, would jump out and say, like, oh, see that, look how even us white people were enslaved. Who the fuck are you? Why are you taking my people's struggle as somehow any way remotely relating to you? Sure, in some sort of weird bubble that we are also Christians who have a European phenotype are considered maybe in same cultural space, but you, a Northern European from Northwestern European, someone who is like Anglo-Saxon or Scandinavian or Celtic descent and speaks Germanic language, have any like this kind of homiehood or brothership to claim my struggle as your struggle? Like, you know what I mean? I'm going into like a lot of like struggle of my people and like let my people go, but it's like ridiculous. This whole colonies having to like marginalize people, categorize them. The purpose of racial division and white is only truly important in Western Europe and former colonies and colonizers, you would say, like colonizer countries, is that you need to group yourself together, find a shared identity, so that you can oppress and repress another group, another identity. So you have to fabricate. Oh, you might be, I don't know, Polish Lithuanian. You might be, I don't know, someone from North Caucasus Plains. You might be Celtic, Irish, Scottish, I don't know, Burgundian, someone. We all have to go into this new colony, you create a new identity. We have same regional origins, more or less. We have same skin tone, the most obvious thing. We should group ourselves together to oppress the other. But that didn't happen in the beginning. That's so interesting. Like, even this like white categorization, white people, especially by founding fathers, especially by the guy on the $100 bill, Mr. Benjamin. Mr. Benjamin, he didn't even consider the Europeans as white. Only people he considered white were descendants of Anglo-Saxons. Some Germans who were speaking in similar Anglo-Saxon Proto-English dialect, English people, excluding Irish people, Welsh, and Irlandians. Everyone else in Europe were considered swarthy mongrels, and everyone else who went beyond the border of Caucasus, like beyond those hills, were considered like not even human. And then Irish and Scottish migrants came in. They were prejudiced towards them, but they had to change their tune and adopt them into the white identity. Then more challenging Italians came into picture, and they considered them as swarthy savages. Well, I do not understand. Like, races will in one breath claim Romans, Colosseums, Greek statues, but then consider actual Greeks and Romans who built those Colosseums and statues as inferior compared to their mud hut building ancestors. Like, just because you're lucky this time through colonization and because Southern Europe and Eastern Europe were brutalized by Islamic empires, brutalized. You had the privilege to explore the seas while we were fighting for our survival. And those savages, only thing they have is ruined because you were you only thing you had were mud huts while we had ancient civilizations. But this is one of my areas that I feel passionate about. I don't care about races, but Northern Europe and Southern Europe. Southern Europe, Mediterraneans, Caucasians, Southern Caucasians, especially high civilization, pyramids, organs, stuff like that. Okay, I'm going mad right now. I apologize for my rambling session, but this is actually a look at good jumping off point to get into another topic that us Caucasians have to deal with. That's, of course, racism of another kind, ethnic tension and ethnic hatred. I personally, as I've stated, do not subscribe to racial homogenization and racial categorization, but I am impartial and part of ethnicity that is much more real, much more tangible. Language, religion, way of life, history, culture, that does shape you. I don't believe your skin color shapes you, that someone with similar pigmentation, again, be it Indian from India or Indian from Americas, they do not share barely anything. But Indians in India, of course, share a culture. There are many cultures and many languages in India. Just saying it as an example. Then, similarly, me, I have my own identity, I have my own language, I have my own culture, and it can go out. I am, of course, half Megrelian, half Tiuli. I have physical features from mountain folks who are Tiuli on my mother's side, and my father's side, the bloodline I continue, I am Megrelian. Cat, leave me alone. Go away. Shh, Adi. And that gives me my direct identity. I'm as a Megrelian and Tiuli. I personally have connection with both cultures. Then, of course, I am a Georgian who is an Orthodox Christian nation with many other cultures inside of it. Here's the thing. I'm personally not a fan of nation states, because if you actually look at history, look at people, there are many different ethnicities and many quote-unquote nations that you can consider that combined into countries that we know, into modern countries. But personally, I'm not a fan of nations, ethno-nationalist. I don't consider that each ethnicity should be its own nation, because we live in a world where many peoples live in different regions. Drawing borders between them is almost impossible, and we need to learn to share a societies. Hello, cat, leave me alone. I'm talking sensitive topics. Okay. I am struggling. No, please, no. Let's be corruption, racism. Huh? All right, what was I talking? My brain is being washed by this cute cat. I'm going really off topics. I apologize for my constant rambling, but I've talked about Islamic slave trade that affected Caucasus, and one of the most recent thing that affected was, of course, Russian Empire and then Soviet Empire, which is an interesting topic that goes into 18th and 19th century and then 20th century. The hullabaloo, that period we try to create nation states. Nation states is a complicated thing, especially to an empire, those old empires trying to build themselves up around one shared identity and one shared identity around their nation. And many shared identities could be, many try to use that shared identity of ethnicity. We speak similar language, we have similar phenotypes, similar features, we might be even related to one another, so we should collectively build a country together. But that creates a problem, because many countries, especially big countries who are technically considered and are still empires, had many different ethnicities inside of it. Most famous would be Austro-Hungarian Empire, or then, of course, Russian Empire, Holy Roman Empire, who was made out of so many tiny little kingdoms. So how do you morph these different groups? Because before nations existed, it was a king and his subjects. Maybe some other king conquered that king and made him into a vassal, a lord, or a baron, or some other regional manager. And then other king were in top. And then came different. Basically, warlord controls a group of people. King is leader of these warlords that become a kingdom, and then king of kings are emperors who subjugate those old kingdoms into one larger, massive Leviathan, the great Leviathan theory and all that. I don't know. Kada vtchilat mikrofon ten. Don't do it. Don't do it. Alright, it's already an hour. Kata. Okay, come on. Alright. Nation states, god damn it. He's not our cat, he's just a local hooligan who keeps bothering me and demanding food. I apologize, I am being harassed by the cat. Can we still hear us? Yes, we can. Alright. I'm trying to power through this cat attack and talk about the ethnicity, history, mystery, mythology, and fantasy as I always do. Now, going back into the 19th and 20th century, nation state building, ethnicity, and how it affected, again, the topic of this video, Caucasians. We were, after the Islamic slave trade almost devastated Caucasus and brought us to near extinction because so many people were taken into slavery, taken into custody, that the local population was almost gone. In this weekend period, I've talked about this before, by the thousands and thousands of reasons why I hate Russia. Oh my God. I think this cat is a Russian spy trying to distract me from the deep and important topics that I want to cover. You can check out that video. But short version is Georgia, Armenia, and many other Caucasian kingdoms and people are weakened by Islamic slave trade. Russia comes in as a new superpower in the region and tries and succeeds in subjugating us by making us fight one another, learning the tools of, god damn your fucking nails, learning the tricks from the bloody European colonizers. They use the same tactics. People don't talk about this, but Russia uses same tactics, same principles to subjugate, goddamn the nails of this fucking cat, subjugate us. And we were treated under similar colonial tactics as, for example, English subjugated Indians and French subjugated many different, for example, Islamic nations later on. I'm powering through this. One of those tactics was, of course, subjugation and dehumanization that many of other colonized people are familiar with. In Russian Empire, Caucasians and Central Asians, the southern people, the swarthy folk of the Eastern Europe and the Central Asia and Northern Asia, let's say Eurasia, were considered as inferior, quote unquote. We had our slurs. Here's don't say I don't teach you anything. Here are slurs for used mostly interchangeably between Caucasians and Central Asians, be it Khachi, be it Churka, be it Chornezho, be it others, probably I don't remember off the top of my head. Well, half of those racial terms is, of course, skin tone based. Northern European Russians considered as Southern Mediterraneans and Central Asians as inferior because we were apparently black-skinned. Our dark features, the dark skin obviously makes me a target for racial hatred in the old Russian Empire. I know this sounds silly for a Westerner to think that I, someone who has pale skin, have been, even to this day, called by Russians black ass, black, the N-word, and local terms such as Khachi and Churka. Khachi actually means our cross in Armenian. So Russians insult to Caucasians, Armenian word for cross. And they consider themselves Christians. They're insulting us for being Christians, basically. And the Churka is mostly used for Central Asians, but of course intellectual Gopnik races do not care about this and throw every word they know towards us. But of course we do not care. Why would I care? Come on, bro. Oh my God! Every time I hear Dchachi or Churga, my heart is devastated. My day is ruined. It affects me so much. I literally found out the word like maybe 5 years ago because I never even listened to what they were saying about us. I recently found it out and it was like the funniest shit ever. Okay, me and my friends actually kind of use it as an inside joke and refer to each other like my churga or my, what's the other one? The khach, yeah. What's up, my khach, and how are you doing, my churk? This is so stupid. I wanted to tell this really comical story to you guys to demonstrate that this, like, inferiority, superiority, this guy is on top, this guy thinks they're the greatest, but they're the lamest, and like this hierarchy is always mix, change, revert, and it's just stupid, man. It's useless and it's stupid. The true reality of Russian Empire's ethnic makeup shows you how ridiculous all of this is. Russia, I'm not going to go into long tangent. I've already gone into one. Watch my other videos. Watch my video where I shit on Russia. Short version is, it's a relic of Golden Horde, where Mongolians and Turks and Tatars, basically, nomadic people, conquered Slavic people and subjugated them for hundreds of years. It's like 1,000 years old, barely a country. And result of that subjugation, system of oppression came to be, where Mongolian warlords would appoint princes and the boyars and local warlords, local Slavic warlords, who would brutalize his population, take twice as much, give half to the Mongolian subjugators, kept half for themselves, and created basically a slave class of Slavs. Rulers were either half Mongolian, half Slavs, or later on Germanic, not later on, before then, in Kiev and Rus, the subjugators were Germanic conquerors, the Vikings, the Rus. The Rus were rowers, the Scandinavian Vikings who went into Constantinople to work as slave traders. On their way, usually would conquer and enslave people. Those people were Slavs, united those kingdoms into Kiev and Rus. Rus being not related to Russia at all. Rus are the rowers, the Vikings. Kiev is the capital they built that later Mongolians destroyed and used a fair and slave trading city, Muscovy, as a new capital to subjugate other villages and tribes. Created the system of nobility, boyar system and prince system, that Mongolians would collect taxes from them. So these lords, the dark princes, the evil monsters, would subjugate their people into basically similar conditions as white Americans subjugated black Americans. There maybe was not racial component to it. There was ethnic component to it. And the Slavs, the people, were brutalized beyond imagination, beyond horrifying levels. There were like stories that they were traded in cars, they were won and lost like property, they were sold like nothing. They were basically slaves. Russian Serbs, the unfortunate people, Slavs, were slaves. Only people who rebelled against the system took on the riding tradition of the colonizer, riding tradition of the Mongolian steppe peoples, and created the Cossack system. Cossacks were Slavic people who took on Tatar and other Turco-Mongolic traditions of riding, and kept the traditions of a lot of the traditions of Germanic previous conquerors, and a lot of traditions of other. It's a mix. It's really, again, complicated topics later on, but later intermarried and tried to connect to European powers. They had like Polish Lithuania tried to conquer it. They fought back. They blah 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 blah. They mixed in, and that Mongolian depot of oppression and slavery, Russia, became Muscovy. That subjugation center, the foreign slave trading center, became Moscow, and Muscovy region grew and grew and grew until again back to the Europeans, blah blah blah, and then the new noble family came into being, who were again of Germanic, of Central European descent. Basically, what I'm trying to get here is that 17th, 18th, and 19th century Russia is the result of centuries of different ethnicities, different nations, different people groups oppressing, pull layer on top of layer on top of layer. This is actually usually the case, not just for one outskirt empire of European and the Central and the Northern Asian steppe. This is a fact for most of people throughout most history. One group of people comes, Slavs themselves are actually not natives to the Eurasian steppe. They came in later on in the Dark Ages. They're technically from Central Europe. Some of them went into East, some of them went into Balkan. So there are three types of Slav: Central European, Balkan, and Eastern European. Eastern European were the late, I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But a similar thing happened, for example, in England as well. First group of people were hunter-gatherers, second group of people were Anatolian farmers, third group of people were Celts who came in, later group of people were Anglo-Saxons, then came in Viking and Norman, similar in Eastern Europe, similar in Western Europe. While Viking Norman conquerors united warlord kingdoms into Middle Ages, high Middle Ages, nations, like not nations, high kingdoms, basically. Those Vikings, some of them went to France. France became rulers in France, became Normans, and then Norman conquest of England. And as you can see, layer on top of layer on top of layer. So there's a popular meme of like English ethnicities, like Celtic farmer, Anglo-Saxon conqueror, and like Norman ruler or something. I don't know. This history similarly played out in Russia, who conquered almost all of Eastern Europe, coming into Central Europe, Central Asia, Central Europe as well, and Caucasus, coming through lies and deception and all the horrible things, genocides and all this. This nation that currently Russians consider is like pure Russia, ethnic homogeneity, and the swarthy barbarians were nothing but our subjects. No, you were subjects. Swarthy conqueror barbarians used to rule you. Just because you made up the large population of the peasant serf class doesn't mean that the nobility, the ruling class, they were not Slavs. They were either Germanic, Mongolic, or later on even plenty of them were of Caucasian origin. Many of them were Georgian, actually. When Georgia came into conquest of Russia, we quickly became, like in Middle East, being like warlords and conquerors and leaders of Mamluk armies. Similarly, Georgians became elite general class, many generals, many nobility. We actually, like small country of Georgia, had either equal or even more noble class than all of Russia. There was a like they were even making fun of us, like every peasant with 5 goats and 6 sheep considered themselves a lord, but they were of no nobility class, and they were ethnic Georgians. Unlike Russian ethnic nobility, many of them, as I've stated, were not even slightly related to Slavic population that they ruled over. Often they even spoke a different language. The ruling language in Russia was either French or German. The nobility were either of French, German, Polish, Scandinavian origin. And then after conquest of Caucasus, many of them were Caucasian, especially Georgian of origin. That is the weird case of racial hierarchy that you might think is simple, that we conquered you, but many of our nobility became part of the empire's nobility. That's why, unfortunately, many Georgians to this day have romantic vision of Soviet Union now and the Russian Empire then, because we didn't consider ourselves as conquered or oppressed people. We considered ourselves as part of the ruling class. Now going into Soviet Union, where the nobility got their heads chopped off, and unfortunately, we Georgians and Caucasians suffered greatly because much more of the population were considered of noble blood, and much more of the population made up of the middle and upper class that Russian revolutionaries wanted to kill. And another effect of Georgians being everywhere, a lot of revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries on each side, be it democratic side, be it white side, be it red side, be it different red sides, were made up of Georgians, Armenians, and Jews. So, the Russian Empire's nobility, as I've stated before, was either Turkic, later Germanic, and Georgian of origin. Then that empire crumbles. In its place rises the society of Soviets, the collectivized people. But even in that system, there is a hierarchy that is created. And in that hierarchy, Georgians, Armenians, Jews, and many other minority ethnic group still somehow ends up on the top. And there's a lot of hatred towards us. You've probably seen hatred towards Jewish people for being in banking and trading and positions of wealth. Similar hatred was towards Georgians, but for positions of government, military, and maybe even economic, especially leaders of factories and so on and so forth. People consider that Soviet Union was the first classless society, but in fact, the Soviet Union actually had created its own unique, more modern form of classes. Classes of title, classes of rank, classes of economical status. Maybe not as divided as, for example, in Western Europe and America is, but still divided. That there were working class, the workers, the majority of the population. Some even division between agricultural and the factory workers were steep. There were, of course, division between factory leaders, scientists, engineers, engineering class, and there were artist class. Those were writers, those were poets, those were thinkers, those were creatives, who made up of one of the more higher classes in the society. And I think this creates really interesting look at race, ethnicity, and the culture, how it is built up and divided into larger kingdoms and empires, especially empires. How these different groups, because of prejudices, because of economical status, because of different reasons, end up in different layers in different time periods. I have to cut it here short because I can ramble about this topic endlessly for hours and hours. If you manage to power through my massive 1 hour long ramble session, I thank you. You're the real one. I have to apologize for my terrible upload schedule. I had many complications, some good, some bad, some in between, and hopefully I can manage to retain proper upload schedule. And most importantly, thank you to my Patreons who have to tolerate my tardiness and terrible work ethic. I'll be sure to work on it, and hopefully in the future I have a much better upload schedule. Have many videos planned, so stick around. And again, thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are the real ones who keep the lights on.